All right. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to our Reflections Fall 2025 lectures. Today, we have an exciting speaker, as always. So before Lydia introduces Lisa Travis, let me just say a few words about the series. Those of you who've been here before, you may have missed this over the last 3 months. Enjoyed your summer while I enjoyed the Australian winter. I'm back in the Cyprus summer. Some of you may have fall, but here it's still very, very hot. That's Kleanthes Grohmann, Professor of Biolinguistics and Director of the CAT Lab at the University of Cyprus. And on the other side of the world this time is Dr. Lydia Grebenyova, Senior College Lecturer and Director of Linguistics at Cleveland State University. We happily welcome you all to the 9th installment of the Reflections online lecture series. Reflections, I repeat, is of course Lydia's brilliant brainchild, our virtual space where we celebrate generative syntax with a focus on its foundations and developments. We are doing that by asking long-standing scholars in the field to reflect on their early work and connect it to the current state of the art. By doing so, they are basically tracing the history of the field for us in a wonderful manner and letting everyone have a glimpse at what it was like for them to be part of all those developments. We've already had 8 amazing lectures by Robert May, Richard Kane, Hagit Borea, Howard Lasnik, Robert Frieden, Adriana Belletti, Ian Roberts, and in June, Rita Manzini, which you can all watch on the YouTube channel. We put a link in the chat here in a moment for the Reflections YouTube channel. So just in case you haven't seen any of those lectures, you can watch them there or download them. In addition, we have a website. I'll put the link in the chat after my introduction as well. The website has a little bit more information, including upcoming talks. So in January 2026, we will have Luigi Rizzi, and next April, we'll have Hilde Koopman talk to us. The link to the website will be posted as soon as I'm done here. And if you haven't already, please register with the Reflection series through the website and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For our older participants, you can also find us on Facebook. Please note that once registered, you don't need to email us again or re-register. So once registered, we've got you on file and you are included on all mailings. Lydia and I are quite old school and have to enter all new requests by hand. So if you're already registered and then register again, we'll take your information and go into our file and try to copy paste, and then we see that you listed there already. So please don't. Once registered, that's enough. Let me just close with a few brief housekeeping matters. Please turn on your cameras so we can see your friendly faces. Keep yourself muted during the talk. Afterwards, again, if you're asking a question, of course, you can unmute yourself. It would be nice if you could save all the questions for afterwards. If possible, keep discussions in the chat to a minimum so as not to distract the speaker or the audience too much. Just as a quick note, I will post today's slides and all the links in the chat in just a moment, because I believe that you can only access what's in the chat once you are admitted to the talk. So if you're just entering now, you will not have access to anything I posted 5 minutes ago. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So Lydia will now introduce today's speaker, the esteemed Professor Emerita Lisa Travis.
Yes, and just one more addition that our student assistant is not helping us today. So it's just Kleanthes and me, and so be patient with us. And we're going to admit people as they come in, but if we don't do it right away, just hang in there, okay? And so Kleanthes, if you can admit people while I'm doing this wonderful intro. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Lisa Travis, who's a professor of linguistics emeritus at McGill University. She received her PhD in linguistics from MIT in 1984 with a dissertation where she explored a number of phenomena and especially head movement. So it's a special treat for us to have reflections on it today. Throughout her prolific career, Lisa has made amazing contributions to generative grammar and continues to make extensive contributions to it in many diverse areas, such as we already mentioned, head movement, but also syntactic categories, variation, interfaces, and formal analyses of Austronesian languages. Lisa is one of the co-founders of the Austronesian Formal Linguistic Association. So very important work there. And she's a big part of the Montreal Underdocumented Languages Linguistics Lab, where they're studying underdocumented and endangered languages from around the world with a focus on theoretical analyses and community engagement. And one of my personal favorites, I'm personally obsessed about this work, is on inner aspect of Lisa Travis. So I strongly recommend that. And so that's the legend that we have with us today. And she will treat us to some reflections on the rise and fall of head movement. So let's welcome Lisa.
You.
And while she's setting up, we're going to put the handout into chat again. Lots of applause coming your way in electronic form, Lisa, in case you didn't see it. Lots and lots of applause.
No, I'm focusing on the slides. Hi, everyone. This is very exciting and a little bit terrifying, but I want to start by thanking, everyone can hear me fine, I assume? Yes? A thumbs up, you can hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, everything is fine. Thank you.
So I do want to thank the organizers. This is really a special series. I didn't know about it before and now have watched every one of them on YouTube and attended one, and they're inspiring, and it's daunting company to be in. So it's Reflections, the name of the series, and that's dangerous, putting in the hands of somebody who's retired, because we spend a lot of time doing exactly that. So lots came up, a lot of musing, and so I'm trying to give it a focal point, and the focal point is going to be head movement. So I'm not claiming to be the expert on head movement, but I did start with head movement. My thesis, it was an important part for me of my thesis. And then I keep dipping back and forth. What I have found is that just going back and looking at it more seriously, in fact, pre-1980s has been very important to me in figuring out the other musings one has, like, what have I been doing all my life? Why am I doing it? And how do we go about doing it? And that was the most fun, is what do we do as linguists, as we all have to explain to our friends? Okay, so it's going to be focused on head movement, and it's basically the position of head movement generative grammar. And as everyone knows, it's kind of gone up and down and been accepted, less accepted over time. And just watching that movement and then lining it up with what's happening in the theory has been instructive, at least to me. So I'm going to, and I realize this looks very strange, but I have the past and the present future. This shows my age. The past is pre-1980s, and the present is the 80s and beyond. But that is kind of the movement for head movement that I see. So what was interesting for me was going back before I was at MIT and looking what I could find about it, and then looking beyond that. But I'm going to be emphasizing things like, so what was missed in the early times? Why didn't this version of head movement come up earlier was kind of my interest. And the importance of phrase structure, and kind of a shout out to Lydia. Functional category is very important, and the importance of seizing on finding appropriate defining characteristics. Okay, so we're all looking for patterns, and what characteristics are we using to determine patterns? And then now the present and future is, where are we and where do we go from here? Okay, so to try to keep time in time, Very quickly, I'm not going to go through this, this is just basically my organization for the rest of the talk. So we have the past and then the present, future, and where, kind of oddly, where head movement fits, and then where I fit in this. I will have some personal thoughts later. Okay, so starting with the 60s. So since I'm looking at head movement, it's the transformations part of the 60s that I'm most interested in. For syntactic structures, a transformation is defined by the structural analysis of the strings, and I'm stressing that, to which it applies in the structural change that it affects on these strings. So we were faced with transformations of the type given in 1 from syntactic structures, and we really are dealing with strings. So you get a feeling that phrase structure creates strings. The strings are what we now manipulate, but as strings. And we're doing various sorts of transformations on them. And these transformations, we think of movement rules, but there are all sorts of things, insertion, deletion, and the like, and we'll talk about that more. But what's happening here is that we're just reordering. So 1, 2, 3 here becomes 2, 1, 3. There's no sense that we're moving up, out, into, or anything. We're just reordering. I will say that that view of syntax made it less attractive to me because I was also doing phonology at the same time. And one of the talks, it came up that phonology was way ahead of syntax, and phonology felt like a well-oiled machine as compared to syntax, which didn't attract me at that point. It has since, obviously. Okay, so what are the other transformations? So part of it is to see track subject-aux inversion and see how what is it grouped with throughout changes in the theory. And here, it's clearly not a natural class. It is just the beginning of transformations. So we have things like passive and WH movement that look very familiar, but then we have transformations like contrastive stress placement or word boundary placement. So it's just basically a change, a transformation. So it's not a natural class. And so we move on to something that starts looking more organized later. And this is getting into the 70s. And this is when things started getting exciting and organized. And so it looked like we were looking for patterns in data and explaining them by processes. And this made me think of Bob Frieden's talk. But now we're looking for patterns in processes. So we're actually bumping up a level, and we're taking the processes themselves and trying to fit them into natural classes. So this is where we come to things like constraints on movement and islands from Ross's thesis. And the one we'll be interested in most here, because I'm looking at head movement, is the typology of transformation as in Emmons' 1970 thesis. And so while a lot of attention was being paid to phrasal movement, he was looking at 3 cases that we might typify as being head movement. So subject-aux inversion, German verb placement, and aux movement. So here, to be distinguished from subject-aux inversion, it's movement of an aux over something like an adverb or a negation. So they have not read the book. What's interesting is, and I say he treats them differently, when he makes his classes of transformations, they end up in different groups. So we have the typology of transformations from Emmons in 1970, and we have 3 types of transformations. So structure-preserving transformations, I put these first, even though they come second in his thesis, because these seem to be the ones where we feel the most comfortable with, and that's for good reason. But something like passive and WH movement are seen as structure-preserving transformations. Oddly, aux movement is in this group, maybe or not oddly. And then we get to the root transformations, and here we find the other 2 possible head movement exemplars, subject-aux inversion and German verb placement, and that will be for a reason that we'll see shortly. But what's interesting in looking back at this is that they are seen to be quite different. Minor movement rules I won't be talking about. So in Emmons' own words, and this is a little hard to untangle because of some negations that are misleading, but so the structure preserving transformations are the non-root transformations. And these seem to be like the poster children of transformations, because he says in the root transformation chapter, he says, I will try to show that non-root transformations, this structure preserving transformations, are subject to severe restrictions, so that the class of possible grammatical transformations which can attach nodes to non-roots is greatly narrowed. Basically, that's saying that structure preserving transformations is greatly narrowed by a constraint. Okay, so that's a nice, this feels like a natural class. In the remainder of this chapter, the roots chapter, I want to precisely delineate that class of transformations in English, root transformations, which will not be subject to the constraints on other transformations. So I'm exaggerating a bit, but it makes it feel like root transformations are basically, their common property is that they don't fit in with the structure preserving ones. Now, they do have, luckily, another characteristic that they share, which is that they occur only in matrix clauses, hence root transformations. So let's take a look at subject-aux inversion. So again, a root transformation is one in which any constituents moved, inserted, or copied are immediately dominated by a root in the derived structure. I bold moved, inserted, or copied to show that this class of transformations already has quite a variety of things happening in it. In 3, we see what subject-aux inversion would look like. The S before the NP will be whatever node triggers the subject-aux inversion, so that's WH or neg. And what is aux inversion? Again, it's just a reordering. So it's not much different from what we saw in syntactic structures at this point, in terms of what it actually does, which is reorder. It just flips a tree. So again, let's look at what other transformations are in the same class as subject-aux inversion to see how, does this feel like a natural class? Well, I've set you up to think it won't because of moved, inserted, and copied. But it is actually quite different. Verb placement in German, yes, that feels like subject-aux inversion. In fact, is subject-aux inversion. It moves the verb over the subject. But things like negated constituent preposing, it fronts a phrase, directional adverb preposing fronts a phrase. So that's very different from the head movement type stuff before topicalization. And then we have parentheticals. This is not exhaustive. Parentheticals, which actually insert something. So again, we feel like we're sitting in a non-natural, it's a collection, not a natural class of process. All right, interestingly, let's look at the one that is structure preserving. And some nice stuff comes out of this is aux movement is structure preserving. And this is possible because we have a position between the noun phrase, the subject and the verb phrase, which is a plausible structure, pre-existing structure, or possible phrase structure, rule structure to move into. And so we have and be moving up into M. And this is looking very familiar. It looks a bit like head movement. But before we get too cocky, German verb placement, again, just to remind you, is a root transformation. So it is like subject-aux inversion. So the problem is it doesn't seem to be structure preserving, like aux movement. So we're moving to the left. If we just keep using the tree in 5, we're moving to the left of that position, same for subject-aux inversion, and there's no position that phrase structure rules would have generated in that position for German verb placement or subject-aux inversion to move to. So since we know it can't be, so the logic would be, since we know it can't be structure preserving, it must be something else. Luckily, it is also seems to happen only in matrix clauses up to that point, looking at English and German. So it does occur mostly in root clauses. We'll see that that changes quickly, but it does occur mostly in root clauses. So he still has it well placed in a category. But we're so close. So Emmons was very close to saying in 1970, but what would be said in the 1980s? So he already had a structure preserving head movement. In fact, he calls M the head of S. So V and M are respectively the heads of VP and S. So we're there really as far as aux movement, but we still have the other two, subject aux inversion and German verb placement, that would be root transformations. So how far away is he from getting it to where we are today? Well, he needed Yiddish and Joan Bresnan to kind of make a complete picture. So why Yiddish? If he'd been looking at Yiddish and other languages rather than German, he would have seen that there was verb second in embedded clauses, and just see Tom Loy for a really nice analysis of why. And he would have been forced to have German verb placement not be a root transformation, part of that root transformation collection. If he had been faced with that, what would have been his problem? He would have needed a pre-subject head position generated by phrase structure. Okay, so he didn't do that. We know he didn't do that, but note his reasoning in analyzing WH movement, which is basically what I've just described. In looking at WH movement, and this is where I like it because there is some intuition he had at the time that WH fronting had to be structure preserving. So this is one of the things I came up with, is we do trust our intuitions. And I heard Chomsky say once, scientific intuition. So I guess intuitions can be scientific. It is imperative that we investigate WH fronting carefully, for it is certainly not a minor movement rule, and we haven't talked about that, or a root transformation, because we have WH movement and embedded clauses. Thus, if our structure-preserving hypothesis is to stand in its present form, WH fronting must be structure-preserving rule. Okay, this is what we do all the time. We think that something has to be right. Somehow the theory doesn't allow it to be right, so we review the theory. So we have a shift in a phrase structure rule. He now has a phrase structure rule. S is rewritten as comp, subject, tense, modals, verb phrases. And what can comp contain? That, and then these XPs that will be the WH things that are fronted. Note that he cannot analyze comp as the head. It would be the head of S, since S in his mind already has a head with M. So what else he would have needed was to have comp be part of a higher projection above S. And this is where Joan Bresnan comes in. So talking about what it was like, I do have that parallel reflection going on. These are people writing theses and at the same time in the same place, meeting in Building 20. So I would have loved to have imagined conversations going on then. So originally for Bresnan, complementizers were inserted by a rule, but she argues that they appear in D structure. Emmons already has it also proposed that it happened in D structure. But for her, comp is a sister to S, daughter to S bar, which Emmons didn't have. Had he had it, he would have written a different thesis, most likely, but that's always the story. So she has the rewrite rule as an 8, S bar rewrites as comp as S, and with comp, like for him, can include that WH, the WH phrases and 4. And just to complete it, we would just need more than one combination, is to split the nature of comp and give 2 positions, give S bar a specifier, and that's where we would put the XPs. So as you can see, the next slide is about seeing patterns. But for me, and I think anybody in our era, if you look at that group of things that appear in comp, both for Bresnan and Emmons, it seems strange that you would have words like that and 4 and phrases like WH phrases. So size means more to us now. I don't know what the conclusion of that is, but size means something. All right, so now I get to seeing patterns. And so this is stepping up a bit, but the idea is patterns are in the eyes of the beholder, and at the bottom I say something about being prejudged. So we can look at, 2 people can look at the same data and come out with very different patterns that they think are salient. Okay, so the idea is not all patterns are neat. I'm saying this, everybody knows this, but these are my musings, and you unfortunately have to listen to them for an hour, but here we go. Okay, in a problem set, problem sets are nice, they're neat. You know that you have something missing, you've missed that crucial example that'll change your rule. So in a problem set, you know that when you put that last piece in, you've finished, you've got the right analysis. Of course, if you can't fit it, then you're frustrated because you know you don't have the right analysis. In the field, it's completely different. You have a pile of data, and it's up to you to discover what the pattern is. And in doing so, you have to put aside things. So there's always going to be some noise. So you're always making judgment calls. What are you ignoring? In theory, it's the same thing. We want to find processes in a family, belong to a family. And when you're doing that, some are just going to have other explanations. And we saw this with Emmons' reasoning. And in some cases with WH movement, he changed the phrase structure rules. In others, he put them in a different category of process. So how do you separate the core from the noise, and how do you not prejudge? And I think that's human nature. I think we just will prejudge. So again, Emmons divided Ox movement from subject-Ox inversion and German verb placement by location, root versus embedded, and that was what his salient characteristic was, and not by size. And just quickly, and this is an aside, but I was going to talk longer about her, but I'm just slipping her in. Cecilia Payne, PhD astronomer, worth looking at. She was born in 1900, was a student at Harvard, grad student at Harvard in the 1920s, I believe. And her interest was what was the makeup of the sun, and I may butcher their science, but is it iron or hydrogen? And the thought of the day was that it was iron. And the reason why that was, at least in what I was reading up on, was that's because it was made it most similar to the Earth. Okay. She looked at the same data as what her supervisor and her supervisor were looking at, and she came out with a different analysis that it was hydrogen. Turns out she was right, although it took years for people to discover this because her research was pretty effectively quashed by her supervisor and supervisor. But in the end, she was right. The main point, though, is two people can look at the same data set and come out with a different pattern. All right, here, a bit ashamedly, but I am going to just give a little personal path, because a lot of us at this era, especially women, went through this path, and it meandered, but with important results. So in high school, I like science and math. I'm basically encouraged not to go in that direction because of my gender. And I become a literature major at Yale. Not a good fit, not a good, well, it was a good experience, but I didn't like school. Vowed never to go back to school, became a dean's secretary at Yale. That was not my calling. And after a year, I went to Madagascar for 2 years, and two important things happened. I got interested in Malagasy, and I met linguists who introduced me to the idea that you can study languages, which I liked, but do it from kind of a scientific, mathy viewpoint. Perfect. So I went back, did linguistics at McGill, and ended up doing a PhD at MIT. But my first impressions of linguistics, it's the puzzles and patterns. It's fun. You take chaos and make it into something orderly. You get to look at exotic languages. When it started really getting exciting was finding out that there was a theory, first of all, that could explain these patterns in a mathy sort of way. Even better, if your patterns don't fit the theory, you're allowed to tamper with the theory. You have to learn, and I didn't put this in here, what's not tamperable with and what is, and I think that's also a question we can talk about, but, and important, you can make a contribution. Okay, this was amazing to be an early grad student and know you could make a contribution. Okay, here's my favorite story, and this one I couldn't get rid of, is in a syntax class, we came across a paper by David Pazetsky, and I think it was like 1979 or something. And I was surprised because I had known a David Pazetsky when I was a secretary at Yale. And he used to come into my office, I think weekly, maybe I'm exaggerating. Sometimes it felt daily, but often because he was friendly with the dean who I worked for. And I figured this couldn't possibly be the same David Pazetsky, because it had been 4 years earlier. He had been an undergraduate at Yale. Turns out it was the same David Pazetsky. And what did I learn from this? That somebody 4 years can go from being an undergraduate, I thought he did music, frankly, but go from an undergraduate at Yale and start writing a paper that without the help of the internet could make its way to Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So I said, okay, this is a great field to be in. I'm excited. I end up going to MIT, and in every talk, people, the organizers has mentioned, what was it like? And I started talking about it. It's a nonstop topic, unfortunately, but being at MIT, and one thing I will point out, it was unmatchable. But all of the people I have mentioned so far were at MIT. So imagine reading all this stuff, and then you go to a place and everybody you have read for the last 2 years is there. So I was being taught, 3 were professors. So Chomsky, Hadros was there, and Joan Bresnan was my first syntax teacher, and Joe Emmons came to visit. So if they weren't teaching there, they were visiting, and it was amazing. But I do want to talk especially about my grad student friends, and that was the best part, because that was just an ongoing conversation, lively, exciting, creative, and supportive, and it was wonderful. And I think that shows up when you see people interacting over their theses and can see the banter back and forth in their theses. Okay, so enough personal stuff. So now we're going to go on to the 80s. And this is where what was set up, kind of the shaky tower that's set up in Emmons, was tipped with Stoll. All we had to do is allow functional categories to project. And all of a sudden, you can say that Ox is the head of S, but nothing tells you that the Ox is the head of S better than 11b over 11a. So letting functional categories project. And the way Stoll put it is, he says, each expansion contains a head term. I prefer thinking of it each head, because I tend to give heads privileged position. Each head is allowed to project. And then you get a tree like 11b. Once you have a tree like 11b, everything falls out. Everything that was a little gnarly in Emmons' work just works beautifully. You have German verb placement. You have subject ox inversion. And at the bottom you have ox movement. And I'll come back to that just a little more. All right, so this is another musing that went on. So I said, why did it take that long to get from Emmons to Stoll? And I'd be curious to hear from people who lived in this era. But I found in LGB, which is 1985, written in 1980, from what I understand. This is Chomsky's view of having inful or comp. To my mind, I'm interpreting, projecting. And frankly, it kind of explains some of our conversations we had during our thesis meetings, because now I get it. Okay, he is reluctant at best to see it this way. So some of the things I found there, it's inful is the head of S. One debated question is whether S bar system should be regarded as a projection of V, with verbs taken as head of clauses, or whether there is a separate system, perhaps with inful as head. But I have been assuming the expansion in 10. So sticking with that expansion. Frank, to give him credit, he doesn't say that it's not the head of S, but it's certainly not embracing that it's the head of S. Later, he says there are evidently relations between comp and inful. That tends for two. So many hedging. Again, this perhaps suggests thinking of inful as the head of S. And finally, comp as the head of S bar. I have also been assuming that there is a rule introducing S where comp may be the specifier of S, or perhaps, as some have argued, the head of S bar. So this seems hesitant at best. All right, so I think maybe that was part of why it didn't happen quickly. But now that it's happened, head movement just happens. And this is my memory. It was in the air of building 20, and frankly, yeah, anybody could have come up with it, but everything is placed. So ox movement remains structure preserving. As I said before, subject ox inversion and German verb placement are now also structure preserving. Ox movement naturally feeds subject ox inversion. Movements are being defined by constraints. So the other thing is, Movement is very local, and we already know that A and A bar movement has some sort of locality restriction. So as soon as you have a movement, you wonder what the restriction is. And given that aux movement naturally feeds subject-aux inversion, and you can't kind of skip that step, we get the head movement constraint. So I had it in my thesis, the head movement constraint, so an X0 may only move into a Y0 that properly governs it. Unfortunately, in my mind, tying it to a theoretical definition that didn't have a long shelf life. And then there's the head movement constraint from Roberts, which is more descriptive and more lasting. And then we get to what I see as the high point for head movement, because now it's definitely part of the movement family. It behaves exactly like I call them the king and queen of movement, A movement and A bar movement. And head movement fits very neatly into this schema. Everyone knows the relativized minimality. But one thing I want to point out, not only that head movement is just a proper member of this set, but a proper typology of positions is critical for the system to work. Okay, right. And we have two irreducible distinctions. So we have size, heads, and phrases, and the positions of arguments. So is it an A position or an A bar position? And we get kind of the schema given in 17 of the typology. And one could say that the head still is a little bit the outlier, but at least it's part of the tree. Okay, we are now mid-80s, and the heyday of head movement, and head movement starts showing up everywhere. So pre-1985, we have verb second as head movement, and then incorporation from Baker. And Mark Baker was 1 year behind me, so we were certainly talking a lot, and who influenced, he may have come up with a head movement condition for all I know, I don't know. But that was in the same era. After that, we see it within an extended projection, so within the NP rather than a VP, and something like Abney, someone good being derived from something more like some good person. So you change person to one and move it up. Construct, state, nominals, Hebrew. This is I just cherry picked here. You could get movement out of an NP. This is from work I did on Austronesian. So a D moves out of the DP that's in spec of VP, and that D moves to T. So it's moving out of a specifier position. Or clitics, I don't know as much about the clitic side. It's used for word formation. And interestingly, it was used for domain extension. So something like Den Dickens' work, this is important because it feeds syntactic processes. So you can't take it out of syntax if it's actually going to allow a further syntax process. And a thesis from McGill by Mina Sugimura. All right, this is getting a little overwhelming, all of these types of head movement. And are there different types? So do we now have to find natural classes within this? Because if you come up with the wrong natural class, you're going to come up with the wrong theoretical process to try to explain it. So now I'm just putting out questions. So finding natural classes, and some of these have appeared in work that's being done. So are there subclasses of head movement? So is it only within extended projections? Is the head movement that forms complex words the same as the ones we see in extended projections? Can you have head movement that involves two lexical categories, like the incorporation of Baker? Can you have head movement out of a specifier? So that's what we did for Malagasy and other Austronesian languages. And if there are subtypes, where does the head movement constraint fit, if all? So is this possible for some of these subtypes, relevant for some subtypes and not others? Another issue that came up right away is there seem to be cases of long head movement. So questioning the head movement constraint. The ones that came up right away were from Marisa Rivero and co-author Lema. So in Bulgarian, we have something like in 18a, where a participle moves over the aux, which you can't do in English. So it looks like it's violated the head movement constraint. And if you think it's just that local, it can be quite non-local. So in 18b, we have the participle moving over two oxes will and have. And to make a point in 18C, it moves out of an embedded clause. So this is work, important work, and should be read as Horizonov and Grebenyova here. It's work. All right, so this is head movements moving around. People are, there's Matysiansky's work, there's Heidi Harley's work that's important. There's a lot of important work that I'm skipping over, but let's get to the minimalist program because this is where things get difficult. We now pare everything down to merge beautifully. And we have external merge, which was previously phrase structure, and we have internal merge, which was previously movement, and they're subparts of the same process. And I am all for it's nicely done. So, but of course, the extension condition becomes problematic for head movement, as most people know, because it means, well, we'll talk about extension condition first. Overt movement always targets the root, and that's basically what the extension condition is. In this early version of it, I find, with the minor qualification noted in the case of head adjunction, but that gets, I think, dropped pretty quickly. So it really is difficult for when you get head adjunction because you're not targeting the root of the structure, you're targeting a subpart, the head of the root. Okay, and if you think the head movement is going to be given, you know, a minor qualification. This is from a plenary talk by Chomsky in 2021, where he says, head movement is illegitimate. Head movement is not formulable in any framework addressing the conditions of genuine explanation. So that seems pretty much like a death sentence. But, okay, another personal thing. People said, are you really disagreeing with Chomsky when I was writing my thesis? And I said, that's our job. We are supposed to question things and figure things out. So next steps, what happens? Do we exile head movement to the PF bin? Is it something not part of syntax? Do we rethink head movement to fit the theory? So in this case, we never quite fit the theory. Something has to be done, but what I mean is leaving the extension condition as is. And here's a paper that came up when Bob gave his talk to an answer to Craig Tiersch about this paper by Horizonov. It's a manuscript at this point, 2025, it's a wonderful paper, worth reading. Or do we want to rethink the theory to fit head movement? So rethink the extension condition. So I'm going to take this latter path in the rest of the talk. And fair warning, I'm not going to end up have time to rethink the extension condition, but I have thoughts on it. So it was basically starting from a different point. The different point I want to start with is understanding the pattern. And when I mean that, I want to know, so Chomsky says, and frankly, I don't know what this 2013 reference is. I looked it up, can't find it. If somebody knows what it is, it was in an old handout of mine. Head raising is a unique operation with special properties. So the question is, how special is it? Is it such an outlier that it really looks like it's, you know, scientific intuition tells us that it's not part of the syntactic system? So I want to go back to relativized minimality, which is where head movement was at its safest, and see about creating more movement typology. And with the goal to try to discover, but in fact, in the end, show that head movement is no more special than any other movement. So what won't be discussed here? How we deal with how are we going to deal with the extension condition? Big one, what triggers head movement versus XP movement? Right now, it would be a diacritic in my head, but I think there's a way around it. And which of the many subclasses of head movement will this typology apply to? Okay, with that in mind, we go back to the beginning and we have something like relativized minimality, and we look at the tree and try to see what the patterns are. So we have three things. We have three distinctions, criteria. So we have size, head versus XP, landing site, A versus A bar, and locality. So we have three types of locality. And are any of these in principle, how do these interact with one another? And will be basically the rest of the talk. I'll just complicate it once more. So looking at landing sites, I just want to switch over because it's easier, I think, both theoretically and expositionally to slip over to another view of locality and doing it by features from Van Eyck. So A and A bar have the unfortunate labels that they're labeled by their landing sites, but Van Eyck shifts that, but keeping the labels that they're determined by a probe feature type. And the locality will be determined by the features, the type of feature. So A bar has an optional feature, and it can be on a variety of heads within a clause. And A feature is an inherent feature on the DP. It's therefore not optional. So it is whenever you get a DP. So when you have A movement, you have something like in 23. And since all of the DPs have Ds in them, you're forced to take the closest DP. So that's a pretty tight locality. A bar movement, since you have a WH feature that is optional and you can place it on a variety of things, just to make a point, here it's placed on the lowest element that would move up to the spec of CP, and it's moving over other DPs, but since this is a feature that we place, it's almost a diacritic for movement, but you put that feature on the movement and then it moves. So it's less local. It's allowed to be less local. So the idea now is, how do we fit head movement into this? Well, in terms of locality, and now I'm doing it by table, the head looks no more part of the family than it did in the tree. It's obviously the outsider here. But that's because of the size. But it turns out it's also the outside because of its locality. So it looks like it's different in two ways. And this raises questions. So does it mean that is all head movement local? And are no XP movements local? So is this a fixed, so head movement basically means very local. Well, first of all, we'd like this to fall out from a probing feature, but I'm going to put that aside, that feature aside, although it's shown up in a previous talk. But I first want to introduce another confounding property, and it's the type of launching site, limb versus spine. So going back to Rizzi, he says it's important that we understand these structural types, and I think this is a third one we have to keep in mind. So this is limb movement versus spinal movement. Made easy by the colors. So things along the spine basically are the heads of the extended projection and their projections. So I think it's obvious and intuitive on the tree. And then the limbs are the specifiers, the things kind of hanging off the sides of the trees. So when we're looking at XP movement, it's always going to be limb movement in English. And when we look at head movement, it's spinal movement. So again, I'm almost making it worse for head movement because it just gets stranger and stranger. So it is the only one that's spine, it's the only one that's type 3, and it's the only one that's X0. So it seems less and less part of the family. But let's give it a chance and see if we can fill in any of these other cells. So the question is, do we ever have, and this is where I'm going to go, spinal A bar A, and I'm just calling this type 3 because I haven't given a name yet, movement. And I will argue that there is. Okay. So we're going to fill the table in this way, and this comes from a paper that I wrote with Diane Massam for a workshop on VP fronting. And as we were working on it, we realized that Nguyen and Malagasy were quite different, and both of them different from English. So the way we came up categorizing them, this was that VP fronting in English, which we know, is A bar. VP fronting in Nguyen is A, and VP fronting in Malagasy is this type 3, this very local sort of movement. If you can argue for these, then you've done at least a bit of service to V movement, because we've shown that XP movement can also be local, and we've shown that spinal movement can move XPs. Okay, so let's look at A bar spinal. it's a little hard because there are three things: A bar spinal XP movement. So this is A bar VP movement. So this is something that I don't have to spend much time on, but they said they would do their homework, and do their homework they will. German has something similar, and because we work on Austronesian, Austronesian also has something similar. So this would be a case of a Van Erkian sort of feature of putting plus topic, but on the spine projection VP. A spinal movement, and this is not a spinal movement, but a spinal XP movement. Massam, actually, I'm going to just share the other slide as well. Massam and Smallwood in 1997 proposed that there was VP movement in Nguyen that went to spec TP. And they said it was the other side of English, say, where the feature in T actually triggers movement of a predicate rather than a subject. And just to walk you through some examples, you have to know about pseudo-noun incorporation. So a lot of people used to think that Nguyen was VSO, like this. But what Diane Massam showed in another paper was you had something called pseudo-incorporation, and I'll explain that a little bit. It's not incorporation at all, hence pseudo. So the object might evacuate the VP, so that's what's happening in 31A. And once it has evacuated the VP, this VP undergoes what now to me looks like long VP movement. It's AVP movement up to spec TP. If the object is a pseudo incorporated object, it sits still within the VP and it still undergoes that same A VP movement up to spec of TP. Okay, so now this is how it would look. You would have movement from this position to this position. It is not as local as type 3 movement. And to follow along with Van Erck, the feature is intrinsic. It's a predicate. I'm not sure why that's to be worked on, how it gets a predicate. It's not part of the category, but it's predicate. Okay. Pred P, perhaps. Okay. So now what about the local movement? And this also, I'm just stealing from the literature, Pearson, and Rukowski was the first person I knew that had roll-up for Malagasy. So VP fronting in Malagasy is different from the VP fronting in Nguyen. It occurs VP internally. We will see Nguyen, it also occurs VP internally. But Matt Pearson points this out, and this paper also came up, I think, in maybe Kane's talk, two types of VO languages. So we have direct VO languages, and this is something like French. So you would have verb movement, but there are inverse languages where you have VP movement within the verb phrase. So the lower VP projections will move. He argues that it explains differences in word order in indirect direct objects and various adverbs. That's typical of some of the roll-up movement literature, Cinque I'm thinking of in particular, but object shift, I think, is the interesting one. So in Malagasy, object shifts to the right, whereas, say, in Icelandic direct language, it shifts to the left. Okay, so just to put these two side by side, we have Nguyen here, where the object may or may not move out, and you move up to this position, but Malagasy rolls all the way up. The difference is the moved object will not move up with VP fronting in Nguyen, whereas the moved object will move up with the VP fronting in Malagasy. So it's this very tight sort of roll-up movement. So I say, incidentally, Nguyen also has roll-up in Diane's work. She talks about it internally, but it stops at some point. So the C movement, we're going to call it C movement, eventually feeds A movement. So what is roll-up movement? So this is not new to the literature. So we see it in Cinque's work on word order. Pearson uses it, and he really does pair it with X movement, where he says that along an extended projection, you need to, the functional categories along an extended projection have to get labeled as V-like. And the way they do that is either by having a V move through them or through the head, or you have a VP move through the specifiers. So it's a way of labeling an extended projection. We did it very differently, and this is where we introduce C movement. So C movement, using a Van Eyck sort of feature, it's a categorical feature, and it's the category feature that's shared by heads in the extended projection from Grimshaw. So it's kind of the opposite of Pearson's proposal, where they gain their label by the movement. Here, the label triggers the movement, but it explains the extreme locality. So there's a feature inherent on every head. I am aware that there are problems with this, but I am abstracting away from them. All right, so here's a representation of the external projection. They all have some sort of verbal feature. These verbal features percolate up. If you're having head movement, you're targeting these verbal features, and you always have strict locality. If you're doing roll-up movement, you're targeting these features and you have strict locality. All right. The other thing you get out of this is that you get roll-up movement. So that once, say, this V constituent moves to this spec position, we now have roll-up movement. The closest maximal projection that has, if we were to trigger it from this upper position, or this one, it would be the maximal projection that dominates the specifier that houses the rolled up element. So you're always going to be, another thing is, I call it snowball movement, but you just are creating more, a larger targeted element, because the feature here, you see the feature on the top 8xp before you would see the feature on the specifier position. And of course, as we know, roll-up head movement is also roll-up gathering. This is how you get the word formation visibly, and that would be for the same reason. Now, there are issues here, but yes, this head, even though it has two daughters, will have that feature. It will be a head that has that feature. Okay, so back to the movement typology. So having filled in this column here of spine, XP spine, at least the head movement is a little less out in left field. But the question is, can we fill in some of the other cells here? And there are some things that leap to mind, like predicate Kleanthes and Koopman talked about V movement as A-bar movement long ago, 1984. Yiddish also has predicate clefting. So looking at things like that would be the place to go. And I've just put them there as a reminder to go there. I'm curious about long head movement. Say Bulgarian Harizanov has a different analysis. I believe he has it as A-bar movement, but there's a possible that this could be A movement. But this one I've looked, the D movement. So D movement Malagasy, it's moving out of a limb, and it's A movement, but it's a head. And this is maybe the strangest of all. But I've argued that it has to be A movement and not head movement, because you would move out of the closest argument spec. So if you have an unaccusative, you get D movement to T. And you get the same thing from a transitive external argument. Okay. So it looks like we could be leading to a language typology. Oh, now I want to go to the next part, which is leading to a language typology. But we have a movement typology, but does it lead to and this is one of the things I found most intriguing. Again, taking a bird's eye view, but this is how one starts to see patterns. If you look at languages and how they fit in this table, it seems to be that they have opposing corners. So if I just looked at English, so derived subjects in English are, you move something from a limb and it's A movement and it's an XP. And so gray is English, and way to the right, the verb movement is a spine X0 C movement. Malagasy is just the opposite. It has VP fronting, So you have this, if you have spinal movement, it's going to be of a VP, so an XP, but and it'll go under C movement. Okay, if this is clear, I think I butchered that. I'm going to come at it another way. I think I have enough time. I'm getting towards the end. If you think of the T head as having a D feature and a V feature, for some reason, which we can think about, it seems that one will be an XP and one will be a DP. You can vary on whether it's, the DP will always be a limb and the V will always be the spine. Okay, so that they have in common. But whether it's the size will vary, and it'll vary together. So if you have an XP satisfying the D feature, you will have a V0 satisfying the V feature. That's English. If you have an XP, if you have a D0 satisfying the D feature, then you can have a VP satisfying the V feature. I think that made more sense. And what makes, and this asymmetry is not just Malagasy, which would worry me, but if you look at languages that have arguably have VPC movement, so Malagasy, Tzotzil, a Zapotec version of Zapotec Palawan, and I'm taking a paper by Oda very seriously in treating Irish as VP moving. That might have to change. And then you, on the other hand, look at languages that have D0 movement. Baker and Hale argued that Breton and Zapotec have D0 A movement, and we have Zapotec appearing in the VPC movement above, and then Malagasy is the other oppositely asymmetric language. Okay, so what now is the status of head movement? Have I moved it any further? At least it, to my mind, has firm footing in movement typology. And what is special about it is only special in some languages. So yes, it looks special if you look at certain languages, and they're often the languages that most of the work is being done on. And the other pro could be that this movement typology is linked to a language typology. What works against it is, yes, it does violate the extension condition. Okay, so what's next? To examine merge and the extension condition. And question if there's a way around this. I think Norman Richards is looking at a way around it. I have a very intuitive way around it that isn't worth speaking about at this point. But the other things that I think I'm interested in also just now questions, understand the difference between heads, terminal nodes, and phrases. And treating heads very different from phrases. So allowing when two heads merge, maybe it'd be very different from two phrases merging. So well, to make my thing work is I have to have two heads to merge and then create another head and not create a projection. But in going forward, I think my main thing is to give head movement equal attention, give spinal movement equal, and give spinal movement equal attention, and examine why languages tend to present asymmetric patterns. So before just leaving and saying thank you, I do want to have one more story that has to do with Howard Lasnik. I had several Howard Lasnik stories, but I'll just end with one, which was he said he would stop doing linguistics when it stopped being fun. And I always thought that would be, oh, maybe 10 years before retirement, which is not true. So linguistics is still fun. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great.
Very good. No, I loved your tracing of the search for patterns, finding patterns, which is something that I try to teach my students as well. And what this was an excellent lesson in how people were looking for patterns a long time ago. And you having worked along many years on head movement, still looking for new patterns to perhaps fit theoretical advances, which is a wonderful idea. And that you're doing this after retirement is also very comforting for some of us who may be close to 10 years before retirement and wondering what's there to come. But yeah.
I'll say the good
Thank you
thing
very
about
much.
retiring as a linguist is you can bring your lab with you. You don't have to have beakers and
Easy.
this.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah, we would like to open the floor for discussion. And as we typically do it, we'll ask our early career researchers, students, PhD students, postdocs, and so on to start off if you would like to. If you're courageous enough, please raise your hand. If you like to do this in writing, you can do this as Celia clearly did. So the first question would be, could neck head movement be a limb X0 movement? So could movement of the negation head be an instance of head limb movement?
Well, yes, everything's possible. It would be a limb neck movement. It would have to not be
Not an extended projection.
It can't be projecting. I'd be curious if it really is a full XP specifier, like could it be a full phrase? Yeah, it's probably I just have a lot of yes, it can be. I would then have three or four or five questions to ask, but it wouldn't be limb if it actually projects along the spine. But that would be interesting. I have to say, when I'm looking at these movements, I tend to look at the real A movement, A bar. So I'm looking at what's moving to satisfy a feature in T or what's moving to satisfy a feature in C, and then it'll get more complex. So my guess is if it's neg movement, it would be more complex. So it would be a different head triggering the movement, and that would be interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's also a comment which is useful for you, so I'm going to copy it and send it to you. It's the reference, I believe that's the reference for Chomsky saying that the head movement is an operation with special properties. So Matthew Corti gives us the reference coming from Chomsky 2015 from Problems of Projection.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm going to send it to you.
I was looking right before getting on, and
that's great. You've got the hive mind, which is good. All right. Any other questions? Juniors, please raise your hands. Yes. Megan, please.
Lisa, I don't know if I still count as junior. I feel like I'm in the transitional period in between, but no one else had raised their hand.
You identify as junior, so you're junior.
Sure.
Years ago.
I'm young at heart. So this is in the middle. You said that you weren't really going to talk about change whether we should try to change the extension project criterion, but that you had thoughts about it, and I just wondered if they were formulated enough that you could tell us a bit about them.
So I gave another talk somewhere on what would the world look like if we started with head movement rather than XP movement. So that was the interest. For me, the spine and the heads, and in particular functional heads, get short shrift. So I just did a mental exercise doing something like that. And I was and I said that heads basically, I'll try not to make this too long. Heads are basically the things that drive syntax. They select, they trigger, they do all this. They come in with the features that basically create syntax. So give heads all the power to the point where they trigger movement, and that the default movement is head movement because for some reason that's more economical. I know there are problems that their features percolate up and maybe the feature on the XP is closer, but I'm trying to really be on the side of heads for as long as possible. So then you get head movement, and then the odd thing would be you sometimes have to Pied Pipe the XP. So head movement is first. Then, so what happens is, and what I don't know is why you'd have to Pied Pipe, but let's say there's something we understand that you'd have to Pied Pipe. Then the problem is that the thing tries to Pied Pipe. This is movement. We're starting with movement, not with base generation. Yeah, so that was it. I said we're going to start with heads and with movement rather than XPs and external merge. Okay, so then you move something up, and if it's a head, that's fine. It can adjoin to the head. If it's a maximal projection, it can't adjoin to the head. Pick your reason, Kane, something. And so it actually has to kind of anti-Matushansky, it has to actually then go to the root. So the root is actually not the first place something tries to attach to. It's to the head where it's closest to the feature that triggered it. It actually tries to attach the head. And then if it can't, because it's a maximal projection, then it goes to the root. So you basically don't have an extension projection. You have kind of a different sort of way of viewing of things. I also think that you can base generate head adjunctions in a construction in Japanese that you can ask me. I strangled, killed the chicken, where you can't strangle a chicken, from what I understand, but you can. This is Naoko Tomioka. You have to strangle the neck of the chicken. So it can't be that strangle is taking the chicken as its argument. So it's I killed the chicken by strangling, but it's base generated adjoined to the, yeah. So there are just little flickers of things that are making me still play with this idea. I'm playing with the idea, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Next, anybody? Any questions? Or maybe the juniors will get some courage later on. Happy to open the floor to everybody else. Including Bob and Craig. Either way, go ahead. Please unmute yourself. Well, whoever wants to go first, please unmute yourself and start talking.
I think it's you, Bob.
Well, I'm unmuted, but I'd like to hear Craig first.
Oh, Craig disappeared. Oh, no, there
Oh.
he is. Go ahead. Craig, unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself? I can't do it for you.
Maybe we can. Hold on. I can ask him to unmute. I cannot unmute.
I know I did that already. Craig, please unmute yourself. Just click on that red thing on the microphone. Yeah, doesn't work. Bob, why don't you go ahead and we'll wait for Craig to unmute himself eventually.
Okay. About the extension condition, it seems to me that the extension condition goes away with no tampering. And no tampering goes away with the formula, what I think is the simplest formulation of merge, which would be a binary target restriction. And if that's the case, then I really don't see why head movement is illegitimate. I mean, as far as I can see, what hasn't really been tried is you simply move the head, you simply adjoin the head to, to say IP or TP. And then you project. The problem, of course, is that if you're raising T, and you adjoin it, then there's a question of labeling, because you don't want to say that the construction has two heads, that it's the same head. So maybe there's some features in T that turn it into something else like a C. But it seems to me that what Chomsky is assuming, for some reason, is that that's not happening when he says that head movement is illegitimate. I frankly don't see it. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents for whatever it's worth.
Oh, I love to talk to you about it sometime. So I was heartened when you said we really don't need the extension condition, but then my heart sank when I was being merged with a maximal projection, when a head was being merged with a maximal projection. Is that what you're suggesting? That when you head move, you move ahead and then it merges with a TP?
Yeah, why not?
Oh.
I mean, that's what
feel like head movement, we're pretending head movement is just like XP movement, and I think it's different. I just think it's different. I think it adjoins to a head, and that's where I see Neil Myler somewhere, and I know he does a lot of morphology. I know all the morphologists. Heather Newell, who's my resident morphologist, phonologist. But for me, complex heads become words. And you don't have a complex head there. I think attaching I wouldn't want to go in that direction. I don't know I don't see a head merging with, unless it's external merge and it's taking a complement. Oh, this gets into Harizonov's paper, which is very interesting. So you do have heads. So when he has a head moving, it's selecting its complement. When it's moving, and I say loosely to a head position, it's actually moving and creating a head position. So I think that's the configuration you're talking about. It has as a sister an XP. It can only do that if that head actually has selectional requirements that it's still requiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to think of an example which would make me uncomfortable. First of all, Harizonov goes down such a different path, it's hard to compare apples and oranges. I like his path the best of any path that isn't mine. But he puts word formation aside, and I don't.
Yeah.
So if I have an existing head that already, that will be selecting that element. So let's say I have an X that selects, this is going to get complicated, X that selects a YP, and that X is pronounced, right? Right? So it has features that are pronounceable. So now I'm moving up, and in order to, and normally I would have, okay, I'll give you I guess we have time, we're not having a lot of questions, so I'm going to take time on this one. We have little v. In English, that's not pronounced. In Malagasy, it's pronounced. So you say it's like a lexical causative. You say little v. Okay, so I have a feature there that says I have an external argument. You get a v of a certain type, and you pronounce it. And I'm saying pronounce it because I know that it's there and it's filled. So now I want to move my verb up to that position, and that becomes a word in Malagasy. So are you following me? The V moves up and adjoins to that little v. Okay, so you're saying I would instead move up, and I have two choices. I move up, and now I am selecting little vp, because and that doesn't make sense to me that the V would be selecting a little VP.
Yeah, all I'm talking about is English.
Yeah.
Which I know something about, and I haven't really thought about how this might extend.
So once you get into, and for me, for Harizonov, and we've been having I'm sorry I couldn't present some of his stuff because we've been having a back and forth and it's really interesting. And then I didn't have time to do it. But for him, anytime something's pronounced, it's word formation because you're creating complex word and that's an amalgamation and that's not syntactic head movement. And he does say, I said, well, what if in one language a head is pronounced, in another language it isn't pronounced? Is it a different syntax? It has to be a different syntax. And it seems funny to me that in English you would just move to little v, and in Malagasy you'd have to move way above little v and then kind of slip down to that little v and do amalgamation. That's why I don't go that direction.
Yeah.
That answers.
I think one of the unanswered questions, big questions in all of this is what's in the lexicon?
Well,
Because-
there's another question I have of Boris's work. What's in the lexicon? Because he has these complex heads. So when you have a head in that what I just described, you have a head below, it selects there, its complement. But now it's going to move up. The only way it's going to move up and create a head is it has to select again. So it has all the information for that next head up, kind of in a suitcase below it. It moves up. It's already used up the selectional information. So that's not, active anymore. But the one that it didn't use down here, it can now use up there. But then what's in the lexicon? That, how many of those little selectional rubrics can you carry?
Yeah.
I think I fixed the sound now.
Sounds good. Go ahead, Craig.
So I was in full screen mode and I couldn't figure out how to get out of full screen mode. If you're in full screen mode, you can't click on any of the icons. They
Press
disappear.
the escape button.
Right. Thank you. Anyway, just briefly returning to Bob Frieden's question, I'm wondering if there's an objection because you take the head and, if we're still doing probes and, canceling features, it's the head is canceling the feature on, say, the TP, the maximal projection, but then it has to undergo amalgamation to become a word, as Lisa said, to be pronounced. But if it's on the TP, it's now a word and it has to undergo head movement again as a word to move to C, right? Which sounds rather implausible because you're mixing the word formation process with long distance syntactic movement. So, or at least, word movement of the V2 type. So this is a problem. I don't know what the solution is. My question was actually about something else. I noticed that Bulgarian in the chart was in, I think page chart 24 was on the head movement side, and Niwayan was on the VP side, and then the Slavic disappeared out of the chart, and so we talked about this earlier on Tuesday, and I'm wondering, what your thoughts are now is. Are all of these things like the Slavic examples now on the Niwayan side, and they're actually VP movement of a spinal element, so that geschlagen hat den Hund is also patterning with Niwayan and the Slavic.
Right. Yeah, we did. We've had this conversation, but we'll now have it in front of people. But yeah. So Boris has arguments that it's not, I think he has an argument that it's not revenue movement in Bulgarian. So the thing is with all of these, anytime you do a typology, then you hope that people are going to go out and really work. People who know the languages are going to come back and say things that will either help or, shift things around. But and I don't remember, I think his argument may just be that you can never move the object with it. And maybe we can show that an object that's indefinite or something that would shift if it, something that would shift, let me see, that wouldn't shift. You'd have to find something that hasn't, and then that doesn't move.
I'm reminded by someone in chat that one of the arguments is that you don't have the object movement.
Right.
In Slavic.
Yeah, you can't scramble in Bulgarian, yeah.
So you have to assume some sort of And what about Niuean? Can you scramble the object in Niuean? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is it scrambling? It's object shift. Yeah, scramble. I guess that's scramble.
Okay.
It's only with certain objects. Yeah.
Just as a footnote, I'm wondering if the Japanese construction that you mentioned is similar to the Chinese construction that we sent with the clapping of hands.
I don't. I'll have to go back and look at those.
Yeah, just something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that connection, but yeah, I'll go back and look.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll keep in touch.
I'll see you.
Thank you. Heather, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for this. Lisa and I talked yesterday. But yeah, thanks for this. I mean, I have reasons, independent reasons why I want to keep head movement and not just because Lisa was one of my supervisors. But I always wonder about the status of, and this is where yeah, I do not blame Lisa for this because I went over to phonology, to the dark side. And so it seems to me that adjunct should be treated differently with regards to something like the extension condition because they're not really, you know, the tree has not, I mean, it's the same top as the tree, right? If you're merging as a specifier, if you're adjoining a head to a head, right? You're not really changing things. You're splitting one thing in two. But so I wonder if just like this kind of adjunction movement should be put aside from this discussion of extension just generally, and if not, why not? Like merger of a head for sure has to extend the tree. But then I also wonder if we can tell the difference between kind of a proposal where there's head movement and one that there's not. And here's where Neil and I have different data that speak to things different ways, but they're both kind of, fringy. Is that we usually treat head movement as creating a structure where the moved head is the first thing to be spelled out, like it's at the bottom of the tree, right? But it's not after you move it. It's adjoined to another head, right? If you just take that structure out of its head adjunction kind of structure, then that head is the specifier of the head it is moved to, right? And so these things should spell out independently, not in a particular order, but if they do spell out in a particular order, it's the head that's moved to that should spell out before its specifier adjunct is adjoined to it. And if we take Craig's nice comments seriously, that if you raise to the root node and then lower and then have to raise another head, that this seems maybe like an implausible sequence of events, right? Then maybe we can kind of see head movement in the morphophonology. Because we've talked about this, I agree that head movement always seems to create what we call words, right? But words can also be created without head movement, right? By just like strings of heads that haven't moved to each other. And those should always spell out from what we consider to be the bottom up. But I'm not sure that after head movement, we should get the same order of spell out. And so that might be an interesting place to look that's not in the syntaxy realm for.
Okay. Can you remember that and we'll talk about it next Friday?
Sure.
So you're suggesting
I have
both
a question.
keep head movement and use the PF bin?
And use the
PF bin that Lisa mentioned?
no, I am
For
100%
the,
against the
linearization.
trash canification of PF.
Yeah, well, that was for you, Heather.
Thank you.
We'll throw it
appreciate
to the
it.
phonologists.
But I don't know what everybody thinks about this. I don't know why we've been
Can you
treating
just say that
that
again?
move as being the bottom of the head.
Okay.
Mm.
So can you just say that again, what you just said, the last thing that we're going to talk about on Friday so that I can write it down and.
Why head adjunction isn't actually treated like the head moving is the adjunct.
Oh, a head moving into the adjunct.
No, head moving is head adjunction, right? The
Right.
head that moves adjoins to the head it moves to.
Right.
So it's not the lowest thing in the complex head. The adjunct is not the lowest thing in the complex head. So
No.
it shouldn't be spelled out first
No.
if you're going bottom up. But we always do spell it out. We
Oh.
talk about it like it's spelled out first, that you still have the same order of spell it as
Oh.
you would have had if head movement hadn't occurred. Right? And I don't think structurally that's what we should be getting. And so I think that's an interesting
So you
place.
would be spelling out the affix before you spelled out the root.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you do get that in English. So
Okay. All right.
mm.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, more discussion.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Sure,
Megan.
Megan, yeah, I'll always ask a Um, mathematically, we know that if you don't have head movement or remnant movement, then you have then you can't generate mild context sensitive string. So you can't get Dutch and crossing dependencies and all these kinds of things. So you need at least one of head movement and remnant movement in order to get that the complexity that we require for human language. And I've personally always thought we should have both because it seems like sometimes the best analysis is one or the other. But when people try to get rid of head movement, I feel like they're sometimes forced into particularly weird remnant movements that don't feel very motivated by any sort of anything going on in the language, except that I need to get this head all by itself, so I better move a whole bunch of stuff out of it, but not for any apparent reason. This has been sort of my impression, just loosely from watching these things happen. And I guess my question is something like, do you think that remnant movement could be an adequate substitute for head movement and or not?
Yeah, there was an era, and it was a while ago, where that was in an effort to simplify, which we're always trying to do, is to say, if we can do it this way, if we can just have XP movement, wouldn't that be a neat system? And since we know that there are cases, German, of remnant movement, say, why not assume that all things that look like head movement are just remnant movement? And what do I think of that? No, I think there are too many movements that are too head position. I mean, it's not what's moving, but where it moves to as well. So in German, you're moving to a spec position. When you get remnant movement, you're moving to a spec position, you trigger subject-docs inversion and everything like that. So we have evidence that it's a spec position. But I think we equally have head movement to a position that we know is a head, like it's the one that appears after, I mean, subject-docs inversion, I just said it. So are those two things both remnant? I mean, I don't know how you would, it would be a big job to get, this is the hard thing. I mean, you do a lot of thinking about, how we make progress and everything. And if you have to find reasons why an alternative doesn't work, you could spend your whole time doing that and never propose anything of your own. So, there is this thing about, yeah, okay, so what would I have to do to show that that doesn't work? I'd have to do this. And then you've spent, 2 years doing something, yeah. If you know what I mean. But so, yeah, so what would it look like to have subject-docs inversion after remnant movement? And the remnant movement ones comes first, and then you get the subject-docs inversion. They have to come in that order. You can put other things in this one. You can't put other things in this. And then going back to the Bulgarian, if somebody says, well, you can only put the verb front, you can't put any other DP front, and then someone comes up with another analysis. That's why we know it's head movement and not remnant movement. And then someone comes up, well, maybe we just have to force everything out by doing this. And then at what point do we stop trying. Yeah. So the short answer is I wouldn't go in that direction.
Yeah, as you can see, it's now night in Tilburg.
And there's a black.
But yeah, the crucial fact is that, somehow light went on. The crucial fact is that you have scrambling in the cases which are allegedly remnant movement. So you get the things moving out, whereas in the cases where it is not remnant is claimed not to be remnant movement, you have rigid verb structures, verb phrase structures, like Bulgarian.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, you'd like things like that, minimal pairs to show
Yeah,
that.
and what one would want to do is look at more languages to see if there's any exceptions to that pattern.
Right, exactly.
So then is the claim that the ones that don't have independently have scrambling also don't have anything that looks like head movement? Or is the claim rather these ones must be head movement, these ones must be remnant?
Oh, well, we're only talking about movement to the specifier position. So like verb second, of course, is not remnant movement. That's that's head movement, right?
Yeah, it would be hard to get verb second or subject aux inversion to be wrong.
Yeah. Although I should say, just as a footnote, Gary and Miller tried to do that.
Well,
He has this weird paper where verb second is actually a case of VP fronting.
Yeah.
okay.
It's easy to find. Just go to his website.
Okay. Sounds familiar, actually.
Lydia, you have to unmute yourself. Do I need to tell you?
I'll forget that. Unforgivable for me to forget it. But anyway, my question is about why you said you're not going to talk about what triggers movement. And I think it's kind of important to look at it because when Chomsky says that head movement has these special properties, it's, as Neil pointed out, from 2015 paper on labeling, where he wants to motivate movement by labeling problems. So if there's a labeling problem, things move. If there isn't, they don't. And head movement never quite fits into that story. So just in addition to the extension condition, that might be something to consider.
Okay, the label, yeah, I've thought of looking at labeling. My general beef is, if you create a system starting looking at phrases and phrasal movement, and then head movement doesn't fit, I mean, it's not a surprise. I just, this is what one does when one has time on one's hand. You just say, let's try just the opposite and start it with heads and see what it looks like. And so I'm not surprised that something like that doesn't work. Then the question is, do you just say, I'm not using that? Or do you say, I'll make that work for head movement? I'd rather do the former than the latter because it starts looking very Frankenstein-y if you just take something that was made for A and try to fit B in, and it just stops looking appropriate. So, yeah. Well, but I'll look at it, so I'll know what people are talking, because I haven't paid much attention.
Yeah, and I guess related to that, just a quick other question. Would you have a problem if all of this typology, which looks very nice, is part of externalization? Chomsky doesn't say it doesn't exist. It's just not head movement. It's just not part of narrow syntax. And it seems like his effort in the latest work is to push the word order out of narrow syntax and into externalization. So all this work is very important and very meaningful. It's just in a different module of the theory. Why not? And what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, yeah, so I have thought about this a bit, and that came up in somebody's talk where we started talking about LCA. Oh, Rita Manzini's talk. And she was talking about externalization and doing word order and externalization. One of the notable things to me, and this is where you get into, I think, and I like this idea, but it's so fuzzy that it's about scientific intuition. If you look at Austronesian languages, they're at heart different. And this is another story. But talking to Richie Kane, I'm working on Malagasy, which is a VOS language. And he says, do you think Malagasy is subject final? And I don't even know how to answer that question. I say, you say verb, and then you say the object, and then you say the subject. I don't know, is that subject final? It sounds subject final to me. No, he says, no, I don't mean like that. Do you think it's like high and to the right? You know, the joy of trees, so we can talk about that. And I said, well, yes, because it combines something in the verb phrase. So he said, well, what if the verb phrase actually, I didn't know, he was working on the LCA. I didn't know that. So he says, well, what if the verb phrase moves up around it? So it starts off like SVO and I said, wow, that's really going out there. Okay, where would it move to? He said, well, I don't know, spec CP. And I said, well, but I can put a WH word in. Okay, well, call it something else. So I said, I'm done. I've given everything I can. So then I spent the next few years trying to show that he was wrong, that it's just flipping a tree, that it's just a normal language that just has the tree. And I was wrong. They're at heart different, these languages. And this predicate first puts them in a completely different class. So if it's just externalization that gets you that verb phrase first, why are they so different in every other way? Unless they're different first and then that shifts the externalization. I don't know, but my feeling is that they're at heart a completely different structure. And subjects are different. So subjects, the verb phrase comes first. Anything in the left periphery is done differently. You don't have WH movement, it turns out. You have clefting. You're saying is who, who, well, is what book you read, sort of thing. So it's all clefting. It's a verb phrase first. If you do presentatives, it's a verb phrase first. It's just, that's what they are. But it's structurally completely different. Not at the start, but at the end. Yeah.
It's a great answer. I haven't seen that kind of look at externalization before, so it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to lower my hand, sorry.
Okay. Well, to give people time to think about a question, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yes.
I know nothing about, well, very little about Malagasy or the Austronesian languages. I don't know anything about Creoles either, but a few months ago I was talking to Peter Mühlhäusler, someone who's been working on Creoles for a long time. And he told me that apparently there's a widespread phenomenon in Creoles, and he works on Norfolk, on Pitcairn, where you have a structure like, for example, give me a cup of tea. It's something like give, the equivalent of give one give one me cup of tea, where perhaps we have determiner movement, D movement, for the one, the accepted article moving out. I'm not sure whether you can process this. I'll just put it in the chat the way he told me, in the kind of transliteration people use. But so instead of saying give me one cup of tea, you would have something like give one me cup of tea, where the one would have, well, presumably moved. Perhaps it's related to Austronesian D movement.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's like completely different.
It's very
And apparently, for him, it's widespread across different Creoles.
Yeah. No, that would be perfect. That would be a perfect one to look at. And that's what it feels like.
Another limb. Yeah.
So, by the way, do I get these chats, a copy of these chats afterwards? Or do I have to?
Where's the specialist, Lydia? Yes.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, okay. And I'd like the name, his name too. No, but that's exactly it. So that would be like the object version of what we're seeing in Malagasy a bit, where the determiner is going up to what would, well, the functional head above it.
Okay.
Be going up to the functional head above it, which might be inner aspect. So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So that comes from Peter Mühlhäusler. I put this in the
Okay.
chat. And moving from Peter Mühlhäusler to Peter Svenonius, please go ahead.
Thanks. Hi. It's September, so the sun's set. Turn the light on. Okay. So for the core cases of head movement, I mean, the sort of original Emmons cases or the cases of, let's say, V to T or V combining with tense morphologically. The thing that's really bothered me more than the extension condition is the locality or the motivation, the featural motivation, which came up just now, right? If you think you have a T and it's merging with a V, T has taken V or its projection as its complement. That's a relation, they now are talking to each other. So T should have already gotten to know V in the, whatever way was necessary. And
need to know
it's very
more.
strange to say now, the first thing that happens after T merges with V is that V merges with T.
Yeah.
I mean, so that the step of verb movement to T seems sort of grotesquely redundant.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like it should be possible. And that doesn't apply, that doesn't call into question Malagasy or VP fronting. And so that isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a critique of all of the cases that you brought up. But for the core case, it seems to me that the relationship between T and V is adequately expressed by the dependency that's formed by the first merge, and that dependency should be adequate for the morphological combination of V and T, as an inflected verb, and for the alternative linearizations of that morphological complex, either in the T position or the V position.
Yeah.
So at that point, literal movement is not needed for those core cases.
Echt daar heel veel. Ik denk, we hadden het net anders over die van Otto, maar de menselijke stem.
Something's going on. Okay. Yeah. So this did come up with roll up too, that you don't move from the complement to the spec, and we do get into anti-locality and things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't have any profound answer, except that selection features are different from whatever triggers movement. That they do seem to be different, sort of. So if I have a T that's selecting a VP, I'm not sure that feature has the same feel to me as the feature in T that makes a DP move up to its specifier. I mean, is that also are those features of the same type? One does selection and one does movement, but are they?
Well, I mean, if that featural relation requires sisterhood, then the DP, not being a sister of T, has to move in order to become the sister of a projection of T.
They can be the same. Yeah, sure, they can be the same.
So at least I can conceive of a very, very simple notion of feature checking that makes V head movement to T impossible, but doesn't prevent DP movement from acting like we think it does, right?
Right. No, there's no question it's a simpler system, and when it came out, it felt good. But then the question is it the right system? And is selection the same are those features the same as the features that trigger movement? So, and so one thing would be to say no, they're not the same. So I am selecting, so I have a T that's selecting a V, but I also have another feature that says, but I need you. Oh, but you're saying that if I had another feature that being sister would be good enough. Yeah, there is.
Exactly. Sisterhood is, I mean, it's the primary relationship in a tree type structure. I mean, you can even, the notion, you know, there's a sort of a different way of thinking of merge as the formation of a dependency without
Mhm.
a new projection. And then you just say, you know, V is now dominated by T because they merge. So T is over V, but there aren't two T's or two V's. There isn't a V and its projection, which are distinct. So then movement of the head isn't even statable if you think of form dependency in those terms.
Okay, I may have missed the last part of that because I was just thinking of something else while you were talking, but I do get, so then I go back to something that we got rid of long ago, which was spec head agreement. So in a way, I'm saying, no, you know, being my complement isn't sufficient, that I have a feature that only can be, so there was the time where we had the checking domain was kind of spec, head adjunction or a complement. And what we're saying are those are all on a par, but if they weren't, that would be another way around it. No, I understand the problem. You know, starting with the data, I don't know what the alternative would be to not saying that there's just something different. But yes, thank you for reminding me of the problem. Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions? Because if not, we're close to 2 o'clock and I can start wrapping up.
Maybe one last comment. Now that Peter assist is the closest and the truest you can get. Not if you think.
You kind of was cut out, Kleanthes.
Yes, yes, I realize that. Yeah, I've got an unstable connection here. Sisterhood may not be the ideal constellation if you're David Adger and you do mereological syntax. Am I still? Yeah. So perhaps in that system, there's another way of thinking about head movement.
Okay, I don't know it, so, but so.
Okay, no worries. I put the reference in here and we can think about this and Lydia can wrap up.
Okay. So thank you so much, Lisa, for a very engaging and insightful talk and discussion. Our next talk will be by Luigi Rizzi on January 23rd at 12 p.m. EST. And it's going to be called Locality, History, and Current Ideas. So we're going to switch to locality discussions. And we hope to see you all there, which is a nice transition from head movement, right? It's all about locality as well. So Luigi is going to continue with that theme. Until next time, take care.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And of course, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, again.
Hope to see everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.